G'day Australia, I'm Phillip J. Watt, this is Dissect Media, and today's video will focus on the deep disenfranchisement, like really deep frustrations that exist right throughout our Australian community about how our government is being run and the design of our social system. Lots of frustrations, lots of people pissed off, whether it's dodgy politicians, tax evading corporations, fake news by the media, the disregard of our individual and national freedoms, which is a really big one for many people, the sell-off of our public assets, the money and banking scams, which I'll elaborate on in a little bit, and many other things, that, including the lack of focus and the lack of funding for resolving our crises within our communities, including the ice addiction and mental health problems and domestic violence and lots of stuff. And we can resolve it. We can resolve it really quick, and I'll explain the money issue shortly for you so you actually understand how easy it is to resolve. But I'll also talk about two strategies that Revive Australia has designed so that we can start really uniting as a family and returning the power of the people and getting this mess sorted. Okay, so the first strategy that Revive Australia has put forward, which we released a video a few days ago regarding it, is simply this. In the House of Reps, put the major parties last. So vote the minor parties and independent candidates that you like the best first, and then put the major parties last. That will get more good people within the House of Reps. In the Senate, same deal, except you vote below the line. You can vote above the line, but you might have to choose major parties that way. If you vote below the line, you can choose as many minor party and independent candidates that you want, and you don't have to vote for majors, including Greens, Nationals, Liberals, Labor, etc., who are all part of the two-party system, essentially. And so you got to mark your minimum number of boxes for your state or territory. States are usually around 12, I think it is. So that is one way to get more people into the Senate that are actually authentic in terms of their working on behalf of the interests of the people and the environment. And that's really important because the Senate more or less approves or disapproves the legislation, the bills put forward by the House of Reps, which we know there's many politicians in there that are doing the bidding of corporations and big money, not working in our interests. That's where a lot of these frustrations come from. So that's a very simple strategy. When it comes to the vote of no confidence strategy, if you're aware of it, please don't do it. It's not going to work. And even if it did work, there's no way you're going to get 51% of the population to do this strategy. So you're essentially voting for the major parties indirectly by taking that strategy. I get it. It's a noble strategy, but it won't work. It's a foolish approach to this. We need to capitalize on the best opportunities we've got. And at the moment, in the last election, 2016 election, 23% of voters did not vote for major parties. Let's try and increase that to 30%, 40%, maybe even 50%. But really, it's up to you guys. It's up to the Australian people. If you work together and undertake that strategy, it will shake up the system, and we can be able to start moving forward in a way where the people's needs are truly met, and we are working, basically returning the power to the people. I'll get to the next strategy now, which is the pledge that was designed by Revive Australia. That pledge is being sent to all the minor parties. Have it. It's all been sent to them, and basically it's asking them to sign this pledge as in agreement with having a national focus on the core content of the pledge. It's not strict policy, so they can choose to debate the suggestions in the pledge however they want. Essentially, we just want them to sign it so we can get a focus on it, get the Australian people behind it so that the media starts covering it, so there is a national focus on it, and therefore there'll be national education about the core issues, which will hopefully lead to real systemic change. Because the more people, the more Australians who actually understand the real core stuff that we need to focus on, we've got people power and we will facilitate change. Let's not forget that we have the ultimate responsibility. The power rests with the people. We've got the numbers. We've just got to work together to achieve what we collectively need. Let's move on to the content of the pledge now. I'll put it up on screen so you can have a look at the individual points of it. The first one is returning the power to the people. So preferential voting, citizen-initiated referendums, we need to discuss these as potential policies for how we move forward and return the power to the people. The second one is respecting the rule of law. So does the Commonwealth of Australia Constitution Act 1901, which is the document that actually gives the power for a government to exist in the first place, should that Constitution Act, that legislation be upheld by our parliamentarians? Most people would say yes. But once again, we've put it as a question within the pledge, so not to wed anybody to particular policy. The other aspect of that one is making sure that we've got our individual rights respected within that constitution. That might mean recognising a Bill of Rights in there, but essentially all legislation cannot undermine the basic natural law that all individuals have supreme authority over themselves, while still being held accountable to doing no harm in self-defense. That is super important, how we start building in individual rights into all this other legislation that really is creeping into our lives in an authoritarian way. That is not okay. We need to make sure that we are re-empowering people and communities to take care of themselves, and I'll get to that in one of the next one. The next one is recreate public banks. This is a big one. Let me explain how money works. When you get a loan or a mortgage or a credit card, that's new money that came out of nowhere. It didn't come from another account. It's new money created literally right there by punching numbers into a computer and being on an accounting spreadsheet. When you pay money back, that gets rewiped from the system, so it doesn't go into another account, it gets deleted, but the banks, the private banking cartels, get to keep the interest for themselves. That's how money works. It's called a fiat currency. That's just how the system works. We definitely need local and state or regional public banks to compete with the private banking market sector in this area, so that we can use the power of money creation, which works pretty bloody good. That's why the money supply keeps expanding, because money is literally created out of nothing. It's not backed by gold or anything else. It's just a faith. It's just paper. It's just digits. That's all it is. And I'll get to the sovereign currency of the government in a moment, but we can use that process to invest in social programs such as mental health programs, whatever it may be, as well as infrastructure such as polycultural farms, and I'll get to all that stuff in a moment. The other part of this the other part, which is really important, this should be blowing your mind. You need to listen to me really clearly about this. Money's created out of nothing. It's just numbers on an accounting spreadsheet on a computer. That's how it works. Sovereign governments such as Australia, who have a sovereign currency such as Australia, England, Canada, America, most of the countries across the world have a sovereign currency. Most of the countries within European Union don't. They gave up that power when they started using the euro. That's why England has the pound still, so it's still got a sovereign currency, and that's why many countries in Europe are preparing to leave the EU, because they've given up that right and they realise how foolish it was to give up that right. Because this is why governments like the Australian government are the source of all the Australian dollars. When you pay money to the government through tax, they don't use that to spend. That money is just put on an accounting spreadsheet and it's more or less removed from the system. When they spend, that's new money. They just ask the Reserve Bank of Australia to put the money in certain accounts, and that's how money is created and spent by the Australian government. They have no limit to how much they can spend. No real limit. The only limit they have is managing inflation. And how they manage inflation is two-pronged. First is by taxes, so pulling money back out of the money supply, or decreasing government spending. That's basically how governments manage inflation these days. I know people might be screaming Venezuela right now, but the only reason why Venezuela is in that position is, well, many reasons, but they also owe the US government in US dollars a lot of money. So they can't print their bloody sovereign currency to resolve that issue. So if you're only spending domestically, such as on domestic infrastructure and programs and whatnot, then you've got no risk of inflation or hyperinflation, as long as you're managing the ebb and flow of injection and taking away from the supply, such as through tax or lessening spending. That's it. That's how the money supply works. That's how banking more or less works. That's how governments spend money. It's crazy, I know. This is a reflection of the work of modern monetary theory, which basically just shows exactly how it's worked. It's evolved like this just through policy over the many years, getting off the gold standard and all those sorts of things. This is just how it works. It's not a this is how it should work. This is how it works. And so that means that the government can spend a lot of money and have as big a deficit as it wants. It can go into the trillions of dollars if it wants to, as long as it's managing inflation. And so a deficit doesn't matter because the government doesn't owe it to anyone. It's creating the money. So therefore, we don't need to freak out about a deficit. What we need to do is make sure we spend money to make sure we lower unemployment the most we can, because that spending will be their income. It'll literally translate into their income in one way or another. And then when it gets to a point where we've got low unemployment and resources and services are well organized both by the private and public sector, then fantastic. Then the government doesn't need to spend anymore. So that's how it works. I'm not left on this issue or right. I'm not anti-capitalism or anti-free market or anti-private enterprise or any of that stuff. That's all good. It needs to happen. This debate is essentially about balancing the left and the right of economics, or public and private enterprise or services. And so we need to make sure the private market is doing their job properly. We need to and that usually is just by non-intervention and just letting them work it out themselves and letting the public choose themselves how they shop and work with the private market. But we need to make sure that the essential services that we need within the public are properly funded, because the private market aren't doing it on many levels. That's just a reality. So I just look at it as a balance between public and private. Just like we do in life, we've got to make sure we have a lot of fun, but also take it seriously sometimes. So it's just a balancing act, just as in this sector, in the economic, sociological, and political sector, as it is with everything else in life. And so what we need to do when it comes to public banks, have a national one like the Commonwealth Bank of Australia used to be, very important, as well as because what that will do is set the benchmark for private banking in Australia. It'll keep interests low, fees low, and make sure that the private sector is bloody treating us justly and fairly, keeping them honest essentially. Then we can have local and state banks, as I think I mentioned before, where those local banks are creating using that profit for money creation to reinvest in community needs. And that, again, that'll just keep the private sector honest, and it'll be a more competitive market than what it is right now. Let's not forget the big four are mostly foreign owned. Most of the money that gets created from money creation goes overseas. That's a big bloody issue. We need to recognize that. So moving on to the next one, which is restoring local production. This is a really big one. I want you to really listen to this and really try and comprehend what I'm saying. Local economies have been desecrated by these bloody international free trade deals, and why do we send as much meat overseas as what we import? There's some crazy action that's going on in our world in terms of trade. And so what we need communities to do is to be re-empowered to grow their own food and to create their own resources to a much larger extent. Instead of using monoculture or industrial agriculture, which is very bad for our environment, lots of toxic chemicals and sprays going into our environment, messing up the symbiosis between flora and fauna, all of our natural systems. We need to move into a polycultural food model, which means that there's all types of foods interacting with native flora and fauna in a way that supplies all of our foods, but does it organically, naturally, and provides a healthy food supply, essentially, and takes care of our environment. I'm sure our farmers would welcome some great changes to the system they've been stuck in, they've been forced into right now, and polycultural food systems, as well as hemp, is a really big a very important move for our future sovereignty. And I know people get scared of hemp. They think, drugs are bad or whatever. No, we have been using hemp for millennia. It's superior to most of the products that we have today. It is so fantastic. It's good for the environment, easy to grow. You can create safe plastics, so biodegradable plastics, biofuels, which are good for the environment, or not bad for it at least. Building materials, concrete, soaps, ropes, carpets, sails, medicines, animal food, the list goes on. Thousands of products from hemp, thousands of products from hemp. And what we can do is revitalize our local economies through that process. We can build in 3D printing and open source construction and equipment such as tractors and boilers and whatever else we need to create these things. And then essentially we're building sovereignty within the community, which will safeguard us from any future national or global financial shocks or meltdowns, which are inevitable. It'll happen again, no doubt, because of the parasitic nature of the banking and finance sectors. Very unproductive sectors, by the way. And we would safeguard against that, but also build in more inclusivity, more education, more knowledge, more creativity, and get people to really start creating themselves. It'd be great for skills. It'd be increased jobs in rural communities. It would be great for economies, great for education and health, as I mentioned. We could actually encourage people to move from the cities, because there's plenty of people who don't want to live in a city, but they sort of have to. That we can encourage them to move to rural communities and contribute to the expansion on that level. And we could really build freedom into our way of creating food and resources within our communities. That is super bloody important. I'm a big advocate for moving in that direction. The next one is returning public assets. I know this is a really big one for a lot of you. The sell-off of ports and banks and land and farms, airports, power, water licenses, the list goes on. We really need to make sure we have public infrastructure to ensure affordable services. We really need that. We need to compete with the private market, keep them honest as well, and also to make sure that we've got that power in ourselves, that it's Australian owned, not bloody foreign owned or whatever. So that's super important. I know that's important for many of you out there, and so that we can do that really quickly. We can go back to that simply by using government spending, because government money is created out of nothing. That's just how it works. I'm trying to really blow your mind with this. You need to do your proper research about it, because it's such a hard thing to get your head around, but that's just where it is. I think I've explained it pretty simply for you today. The last one is removing corruption. We really need to get rid of the lobbying, infiltration of our policy, as well as political puppetry, bribery, and just general donations. Corporations, big money, control the policy through those measures. We need to resolve that. Full-scale independent investigations into it. We can basically just use the government spending once again to provide equal funding for campaigns for people who want to run for government. And so instead of relying on corporate donors and their deals with media and whatnot, we can give people from their local communities an opportunity to be represented, to represent their communities in their government. So that can be done pretty quickly as well. So anyway, that's the pledge. I know I've been speaking for nearly 20 minutes. I hope I've kept you on board and interested throughout this discussion. It's so important that the Australian people come together and contribute to this. Do the voting strategy and participate in the pledge. Download the pledge from the website www.reviveaustraliamovement.info. Get it from there, send it to your local candidates, deliver it personally to them, get them to take photos or videos, get them to explain their position, their policy positions on the content, and let's start building a national focus. This isn't going to work without you, the people, getting involved. It's so important that you do get involved, because this is really about your children and not, well, our future too, but it's about our children's future. And I'm sure we all want to leave something better behind than what we had. And so far, we're going further into centralization and authoritarianism and control. It's not a good path we're heading, or direction we're heading in right now. We need to switch gears and go back to decentralization, localization, re-empowerment of communities and re-empowerment of individuals in those communities. It really is the future that we need to choose. Thanks for watching. Revive Australia Movement.info. This is Dissect Media, and I'm Phillip J. Watt.